Why can't there be more than one God? Why can't there be multiple gods? I often get asked this question when I'm interacting with Hindu friends, and they're well intentioned. Their goal is not to just point out disagreements with Christianity, but they really just want everyone to be able to believe in a different God and find their own way, rather than just disagreeing and attacking one another's beliefs. And that makes sense coming from a Hindu mindset where there are over 330 million gods, and you can kind of take your pick and go to the different ones that you think will bring you the most fortune and guidance and blessing in life. However, I do want to attack this from a Christian theological standpoint of why must there only be one God? Why is it inherently logically impossible that there can't be a different number? I think that's a great question. It really comes down to the ontology of what we mean by God. And I think the definition of God used by Christians is very different from the definition used by Hindus. But I think there's also room for maybe a similar understanding that I do want to unpack. When Christians are talking about God, we are talking about the creator of heaven and earth, the only one who exists independently and from which everything else flows. As such, the concept of being infinite is very important, that there's nothing that God lacks. There isn't something in existence which exists and is an ontological necessity, which God himself doesn't have. And that's exactly what would be necessary for the reality to be if there were more than one God who existed past eternally. And that's what you would find in these other polytheistic views where there's, the God of love, there's the God of war, there's the God of wisdom. They're each the God of something, but that necessitates that they lack something that each other have. If they all had exactly the same thing, then there'd be no distinction between them. In other words, because God is infinite, that means he doesn't lack something. But in order for there to be another God that's past eternal, that'd mean that he would have to lack something that the other one has. The other one would have to lack something that he has. That way we could actually distinguish them as two different gods. But that's impossible if there's one creator of the world. Because if he's the one creator, then everything that exists ontologically flows from him, which means that everything comes from God. Love, goodness, beauty, logic, wisdom, it's all from God. So because God is infinite, there cannot actually be more than one God. That would be a contradiction. You can't have two different infinite beings. You can only have one. So that's a response that I often have to give to my Hindu friends who ask, why can there only be one God? Why can't there be a lot of different gods? But also, we realize that in the Christian view and in the Bible, there is a description of multiple gods. And these are in the term Elohim, disembodied spirits, in other words, smaller g gods. There is the belief in other spiritual beings, other powerful beings. But ultimately, we see that they are not the ultimate source from all creation. They are fellow created beings. And some of them are good, some of them serve God and live in harmony with God, obeying him and reflecting him. Others have rebelled against him, and they seek glory and honor and power and renown for themselves. We call those demons. The devil is one of them. So, as such, I think that there is room theologically to believe in these other smaller g gods, these other disembodied spirits which are powerful. And I think around the world do actually receive attention and worship, but they are not the infinite God. They each have flaws. You read about Hindu gods or even gods of other religions, Egyptian gods, Roman and Greek gods. They all have these awful flaws, whether they're just bloodthirsty or jealous. They wage war against themselves. They rape each other in creation. They lie. They lack goodness and holiness. As such, they cannot be infinite. They cannot be the God above all creation. Only a God who is holy and lacks nothing, has no flaws, can be the God of all creation. And for this reason, there must be a categorical difference that the God of all creation, Yahweh, who is holy and infinite, alone is big G God. And these other disembodied spirits, what you might call small g gods, they can quite easily be real. In fact, I think it makes sense historically why there's been so much worship of these different gods, but even ontologically and biblically, that these beings are real. We're told to believe that they're real and that we shouldn't mess around with them. Instead, we should give worship to the one true God. So there's room for many gods in that meaning of the word God, but not in the meaning of the word God as infinite creator. That'd be a logical contradiction. Now, at this point, some of my Muslim friends would ask, okay, but what about the Trinity? Don't you Christians believe in three gods too? How can they all be past eternal? How can they be different from one another, but yet all be there? I think an important distinction here is that as Christians, we don't believe in three gods. We believe in one God in three persons. Now, that's really important. Ontologically, it's one God, it's not three different ones, but he exists in three persons. And for that reason, he can still be infinite, lack nothing, but he just exists in three persons. You might say, isn't that a contradiction? No, not really, because we see that there's a distinction between the reality of a thing and a person, a who and a what. For example, take a human being, right? We are one what and one who, right? A rock, on the other hand, is one what, but it's zero who's. Now, that shows us that a what and a who are not the same thing. Just because you have one what doesn't mean that you have one who. You can be one what without a who. So, just as there is such a categorical distinction between a rock and a human person, that quite easily makes it possible for God, who's categorically different from us, to also be different, to be one what and three who's. And these three persons have existed in perfect loving relationship with one another for past eternity. So it's one God in three persons. And this actually makes a lot of sense because only a God who exists in three persons can actually be infinitely loving. You see, a God who's existed by himself with one person past eternally can't actually be ontologically loving because to be loving, there must be something to love, something to receive love, and a spirit of love within it. But that would only be possible if there were one person once creation had started. Because once other beings had been created, then God could love. But then that would be something that he starts doing and he learns. He wouldn't actually be loving in his essence. We see a God existing in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. As explained by C.S. Lewis, he says, their love is possible past eternally because there is a Father loving, there's a Son receiving love, and there's a very real spirit of love within them. So that's the important distinction that as Christians, we believe that there can only be one infinite creator. There's only one God. And other spirits exist, but they're his creation. Also, we see that the existence of one God existing in three persons makes sense ontologically. It's not a contradiction. A person does not equal a thing. Just as a rock can be one thing with zero persons, a human can be one thing with one person. Quite easily, God, being in a category of his own, could be one thing and three persons. And this makes sense of how God would be ontologically and eternally loving. That's how it can be part of his essence. And lastly, this even makes sense biblically. You might say, oh, the Trinity was made up. We don't even see stuff like that until the New Testament when we see them interacting at Jesus' baptism. Jesus, the Son, is baptized. The Father says, this is my Son with whom I'm well pleased. And the Holy Spirit descends in the form of a dove. We see the three of them interacting there. But even in the Old Testament, we see God described as a compound unity. Deuteronomy 6:4, which is often pointed to describe that God is one. But the word one there is echad. Now, the interesting thing about the word echad is it means a compound unity. In other words, it's oneness, but it's also got parts. Equally and interestingly, in Genesis, when God says, let's create man in our image, once again, that represents a compound unity that says God, right? It doesn't say gods. It says God said, let's create man in our image. So once again, this represents that God is one, but he's got three persons, which makes a lot of sense given the biblical narrative. So ultimately, to bring this video to a close, we see that only one infinite creator can exist. The rest is all his creation flows out of him. And he's ultimately the only example we see that is holy and good and lacking nothing. All these other stories of gods, they have big flaws and they lack things. They're not infinite. Also, we see that even though God is one, it makes sense they exist in three persons, given biblical passages from the Old Testament and the New Testament. And also explains how we can experience an ontological existence within him of things that would otherwise be impossible until he started creating, such as love. Only a God existing in three persons can experience love past eternally, whereas a God in one person could only experience love once he created something else to love. It's a lot of different thinking, but I think it'll help you as you're engaging your Hindu friends and your Muslim friends, explaining the essence of what we mean by God. Because when you talk to different religions and different worldviews, inherently we're going to mean different things by these words we use for God. But I think we can also find common ground and use that to try and explain differences. So if you found this video helpful, then please like the video and share it with someone you think would also benefit from it, and subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.